jury in the above entitled action find the defendant, Monica Cementilli, guilty of the crime of murder in violation of.
They say betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It's almost always the people sitting at your table, laughing in your kitchen, sleeping beside you in bed. On a cool January afternoon in 2017, a 16-year-old girl walked into her family's backyard in Los Angeles and found her father face down on the patio near the pool, lying in a spreading lake of blood. At first, everyone thought it was a burglary gone wrong, a random act in an upscale neighborhood. Wrong place, wrong time. But this wasn't random, and it wasn't about a stranger hopping a fence. This was the beginning of a story about fame, money, sex, and a murder that the killers tried very hard to make look like anything but what it really was. This is the murder of celebrity hairstylist Fabio Big Daddy Cementilli. This is part 1. Fabio Cementilli didn't just cut hair, he built a life out of it. Born in Canada to Italian immigrant parents, he dropped out of high school early to chase his dream of becoming a hairstylist. Under the mentorship of his older sister and other industry legends, he learned how to turn hair into sculpture. Precise cuts, bold shapes, color work that made people stop and stare. By his 20s and 30s, he was winning big hair competitions and running a busy salon with dozens of staff. He wasn't just good at what he did. He was magnetic. Loud, funny, and endlessly talkative, the kind of guy who could stand on a stage in front of hundreds of stylists and make them feel like they were all hanging out in his living room. Over more than 25 years in the industry, Fabio became a major name in the professional hair world. He moved from working behind the chair to educating other stylists, judging global hair competitions, and eventually stepping into one of the most coveted roles in the beauty business. A top education executive. He served as vice president of education for Wella Coady, traveling constantly, coaching artists, and promoting the brand across North America and beyond. People in the industry called him Big Daddy. It wasn't just about his physical presence, stocky build, big smile, strong handshake. It was about how he treated people. Younger hairdressers talked about him like a proud uncle or second father. He remembered names, encouraged them, and showed up in their lives in ways most corporate executives never do. Behind the public persona, he was also a family man. By the time he moved to Southern California around 2007, he was remarried. His second wife, Monica, was stylish, polished, and known for loving beautiful things. Good wine, designer clothes, an elegant home. Together they lived in a large house in Woodland Hills, a quiet, affluent neighborhood in the western San Fernando Valley. They shared 2 daughters, both teenagers by 2017. Fabio also had an older son, Luigi, from his first marriage, who remained in Canada but was still close to his father. Friends who visited the Cementilli home described it as warm, open, and full of life. And people constantly coming and going, food always on the table, conversations stretching late into the night. From the outside, it looked like a dream. A big, comfortable home with a pool and a patio. A successful husband in a glamorous industry. A wife who looked every bit the part of a high-end LA beauty executive's partner. Teen girls growing up with every opportunity. Nobody looking at that picture would have guessed that 10 years later, this address would be known for something else, a brutal, calculated killing. January 23, 2017 was a Monday. For Fabio, it was supposed to be a normal work-from-home day. He traveled a lot for his job, shows, trainings, events, but when he was in town, he cherished his time at home. He liked to sit outside on the back patio by the pool, laptop open, reviewing videos, planning education events, answering emails from stylists all over the world. He was 49 years old. He had fought through serious health problems, including colon cancer surgery, and was still rebuilding his strength. Being outdoors, feeling the sun and air while he worked, helped ground him. That patio was one of his favorite places in the world. Sometime that afternoon, as he sat in his backyard, someone came up behind him. We'll get into who that was and what led them there in later parts. For now, all we know is what the medical examiner and detectives would later reconstruct. Fabio was ambushed and never had a chance. He was stabbed 7 times. Deep, vicious blows to his neck, face, chest, and upper torso. Several of the wounds on their own would have been fatal. Together, they guaranteed he would not survive. Neighbors didn't report hearing a gunshot. There was no loud bang, no scream that carried over the walls. Just the quiet horror of a knife attack carried out in his private sanctuary. He collapsed on the hard surface of the pool deck, bleeding heavily, surrounded by the calm blue water of the swimming pool and the familiar furniture of his home. He lay there alone for hours. Around 5 p.m., his younger daughter came home from school. She walked through the house like any other day, backpack on, mind probably still half on classes, friends, homework. Then she stepped out to the backyard and saw something no child should ever see. Her father, face down on the patio, covered in blood. Security video later showed a terrified teenager running for help, then returning to her father, trying desperately to make sense of what was happening. She called 911. Officers from the LAPD's Topanga division rushed to the scene along with paramedics. When first responders arrived, the sun was going down. Darkness was starting to creep over the neighborhood. On the patio, under the fading light, Fabio was motionless. He wasn't breathing. The injuries to his face and neck were so severe that even hardened detectives later described the scene as extremely gruesome. Paramedics could only pronounce him dead at the scene, while some officers sealed off the backyard and tried to comfort the teenage girl who just found her father's body. Others began walking the property, looking for signs of what had happened. They noticed right away that Fabio's Porsche was missing. It was a newer 911 sports car, his pride and joy. That detail, combined with the bloody body on the patio and the chaos inside the house, immediately created a story in their minds: home invasion robbery. Inside, several rooms looked disturbed. Drawers pulled out, things left on the floor, closets open, a safe was gone. It all fit a pattern Los Angeles police had become very familiar with over the previous few years. Groups of burglars, sometimes called knock-knock burglars, targeting upscale homes in the hills and valleys, breaking in during the day and grabbing whatever they could carry. Woodland Hills, with its gated driveways and nice cars, had seen its share of those crimes. Now it looked like one of them had turned deadly. Media reports that night and the next day reflected exactly that. A beauty company executive found stabbed to death at his Woodland Hills home. Police believed it might be a home invasion burglary gone wrong. A luxury car stolen. No suspects yet. On social media and in group texts, stylists and industry friends all over the world were stunned. They posted photos of Fabio on stages, in salons, at shows, always smiling, often hugging someone, arms around hairdressers he'd mentored. They shared memories of him telling jokes backstage, staying late to help someone with a haircut, pushing them to enter competitions they never thought they could win. In Canada, his sisters and extended family got the call that shattered their lives. His son Luigi said it felt like a nightmare. That kind of out-of-body shock where your brain refuses to accept that someone who was so full of life and energy could be gone, just like that. One day they were messaging and planning future trips. The next day he was trying to process the words "stabbed to death" and "backyard" and "Los Angeles Police Department." Back in Woodland Hills, Monica's world appeared to fall apart in front of everyone. She called friends, crying, telling them they'd killed Fabio. She invited close people over to the house, where crime scene tape and officers were already in place. One friend later remembered how a stranger escorted her inside and warned, "Don't step in the blood." In those first hours and days, Monica seemed shattered. She told people she was lost, that she kept repeating, "I'm not a wife anymore," over and over. On social media, she posted photos of Fabio and wrote about how much she loved him, how heartbroken she was. At the funeral, she gave a eulogy, talking about his unconditional love and the adventure of their life together. From a distance, it looked like the tragic story of a widow whose husband had been murdered by faceless criminals. At home, their two daughters clung to the only parent they had left. They were teenagers, suddenly dealing with grief, fear, and intense media attention. Cameras outside the house, headlines about their dad's brutal killing, rumors swirling in the community. For the beauty industry, the shock turned into public tributes. Magazines and trade sites ran profiles celebrating Fabio's legacy. They wrote about his role in major educational programs, his passion for mentoring, and the way he'd helped raise the standards of professional hairdressing. Colleagues called him an industry giant, a force, a champion for hairdressers. On paper, everything pointed to a tragic, senseless attack. A loving father of 3 sitting outside working on a quiet January afternoon. A sudden robbery, maybe by strangers who'd seen his car or watched the house. A violent struggle, a stolen sports car, a family left in ruins. Even the police believed it at first. There had been an uptick in high-end burglaries. The house was clearly disturbed. The Porsche had vanished. For months, detectives worked under the assumption that they were looking for unknown burglars. Probably men who'd hit other homes and might hit again. They canvassed the area. They collected surveillance video from neighboring properties. They put out information about the stolen car. A few days later, that car turned up abandoned several miles away with blood traces inside. But mixed into that clear, simple story were tiny details that didn't quite fit. Fabio's expensive watch, worth thousands of dollars, was still on his wrist. Some valuables in the home had been ignored. The scene felt just enough like a burglary to be convincing, but also, to trained eyes, just a little bit too convenient. At the time, though, those details were just questions on a detective's notepad. For Fabio's family, grief drowned out everything else. His sisters flew in, stunned and devastated. Friends packed the memorial services. Guests filled the Woodland Hills house for a wake, clinking glasses in his honor, sharing stories, hugging Monica. One of those guests noticed something strange. A man at the wake that not many people recognized, standing next to Monica in the backyard where Fabio had died. A bandage wrapped around one of his fingers. At that moment, it was just a blurry detail, one more odd thing in a week full of them. It would take months before detectives connected that bandage, that man, and the missing Porsche to something far darker than a random burglary. Because Fabio's murder wasn't about knock-knock burglars or a robbery that spiraled out of control. It was about a secret relationship, a life insurance policy worth more than $1 million, and a plan that, for a while, fooled almost everyone, including the people who loved him most. In the next part, we'll look at how the investigation slowly shifted from unknown burglars to the people closest to Fabio. We'll dig into the DNA left at the scene, the mysterious man at the wake, and the discovery of a hidden affair that turned a grieving widow into a prime suspect. For now, we leave the story on that blood-stained patio in Woodland Hills, with a beloved father and industry icon lying where he fell, and a city convinced that the killers were still out there, somewhere in the dark. For months after Fabio Cementilli was murdered, the story seemed simple. A brutal, tragic, senseless crime in a nice neighborhood. A beloved husband and father, stabbed to death beside his pool. A ransacked house. A missing Porsche. Los Angeles had been dealing with a wave of high-end burglaries for years. To the LAPD at first, Fabio looked like another victim, one whose burglars had been bolder and more violent than most. Detectives from the Topanga Division canvassed the Woodland Hills neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking about strange cars, suspicious people, anything at all. They collected whatever surveillance footage nearby homes had. Security cameras are everywhere in LA, but they're not a magic fix. Angles are bad. Motion sensors don't trigger. People forget to replace old DVRs. Within days, Fabio's Porsche 911 turned up abandoned in the San Fernando Valley in the Winnetka area. When detectives searched the car, they found small traces of blood inside. Not enough to see with the naked eye, but enough to collect. At the house, crime scene techs had already taken multiple samples: blood on the patio, blood near Fabio's body, and crucially, biological material from under his fingernails. It told detectives one very important thing: he had fought back. Maybe not much. The attack had been fast and vicious, but enough to scratch or grab at whoever was stabbing him, enough to leave their DNA behind. That DNA became the case. Back in the lab, months passed. If you've ever followed real-life cases, you know DNA doesn't get processed overnight, no matter what TV shows tell you. There's a backlog. There are priorities. There are dozens of other cases in line. Meanwhile, detectives kept working the more ordinary angles. They looked at burglary patterns. Could this be the same crew hitting other wealthy homes in the valley? Crime analysts compared Fabio's case to others: point of entry, time of day, what was taken, what was left. A safe was missing from the Cementilli home, but expensive items like Fabio's watch had been left behind. That was odd, but not enough to prove anything. They looked at Fabio's background. Any enemies? Any angry ex-employees? Any business partners with grudges? The answer from everyone was the same. He was a nice guy. Loud, funny, sometimes a little chaotic, but not the kind of man anyone wanted to see dead. They sat down with Monica, again and again. On the surface, she was the picture of a grieving widow. She cried. She talked about how much she loved her husband, how devoted he was to his kids, how lost she felt without him. She asked about updates on the case. She told friends and reporters that she wanted justice. At first, the questions detectives asked her were pretty standard. Had Fabio been acting strangely? Did he seem worried about anything? Did he say anything about threats, debts, or feeling followed? Her answers didn't give them a direction. So they widened the circle. They looked at finances. Fabio had a good salary as a vice president for a major hair care brand. The house was big, the cars were expensive, the lifestyle was comfortable. But when they looked closer, they saw cracks. Credit card balances, big purchases, the kind of spending that can outrun even a nice corporate paycheck. Then they saw something else: life insurance. A policy of roughly $1.6 million. Primary beneficiary, Monica. On its own, that still didn't prove anything. Lots of families in that income bracket carry big life insurance policies, especially when the main earner travels and has had health issues. For a while, the burglary theory still made the most sense. Then quietly, everything changed. The DNA hit came back. When the lab ran the unknown male DNA from under Fabio's fingernails and from the Porsche, through CODIS, it matched someone already in the system. Not because of a past burglary, because he was a registered sex offender. His name was Robert Louis Baker. Investigators started pulling his file. He wasn't some random gang burglar. He was a 50-something man living in the Thousand Oaks area, a former porn actor and convicted sex offender who now worked odd jobs, including as a racquetball and fitness instructor at a local club. That detail sparked a memory for some people close to Fabio's family: racquetball. Because Monica Cementilli had a racquetball coach. His name? Robert Baker. Once that connection clicked, everything started to tilt. detectives began digging into Baker's life. Where he lived, where he worked, who he knew. They pulled his photo and compared it to images they'd already collected from Fabio's world. There he was, in pictures from the wake at the Sementilli house, standing in the backyard near the pool, wearing a bandage on his finger. At the time, people had barely noticed him. He was just some guy Monica knew from the gym, she'd said. A coach, a friend. Now that bandage looked a lot like the kind of injury someone might get from a knife attack, where the victim fights back. With the DNA match in hand, detectives got warrants. They took Baker's DNA directly and confirmed the match. They seized his phone and started going through records, calls, texts, emails, GPS pings. They pulled cell tower data to see where his phone had been on January 23, 2017. It painted a damning picture. His phone had traveled from his area toward Woodland Hills that afternoon. It had pinged towers near the Sementilli home around the time of the murder. Then it had moved again, toward the area where Fabio's Porsche was eventually abandoned. For police, this was no longer a burglary investigation. This was a targeted killing. But the question now wasn't who. They had that. It was why. And who helped? Detectives didn't have to look very far for the next answer. They took Monica's phone records and lined them up against Baker's. What they saw made everything else suddenly make sense. There weren't just a few calls between a client and a racquetball coach. There were hundreds, thousands, calls at all hours, long conversations, rapid-fire text exchanges. In the weeks and months before Fabio's murder, Monica and Robert had been in near constant contact. To detectives, that looked less like, "I book sessions at the gym," and a lot more like, "I'm having an affair." They pressed deeper. They interviewed people from the racquetball club, staff, other members, anyone who might have seen Monica and Robert together. Witnesses described them as extremely close. They weren't just hitting balls on the court. They were seen hugging, sharing intimate moments, disappearing together for long stretches. People talked about them sneaking kisses, acting like more than just coach and student. Then came another big reveal. This wasn't a brand new fling. According to investigators, the relationship had been going on for around a year and a half before Fabio was killed. A secret lover, a big life insurance policy, a husband who traveled a lot and had no idea. The classic ingredients of something ugly. Prosecutors would later say that the affair started around 2015 when Monica joined a local club and began taking racquetball lessons. Robert Baker, outwardly helpful and charming, had a pattern of seducing women. Monica, married to a man who was often on the road and recovering from health problems, slipped into his orbit. They started meeting outside the club, at hotels, in parking lots, in her car, on phone calls that lasted deep into the night. While Big Daddy flew around the world mentoring hairdressers, Monica and her coach were building a separate life. When detectives confronted her with the phone records and what witnesses had seen, Monica denied that the affair was serious. She minimized. They were close, yes. They had made a mistake, but she insisted she had nothing to do with Fabio's murder. Police weren't buying it. They kept pulling threads. On the financial side, they discovered that Monica and Fabio's finances were more strained than they first appeared. 2 mortgages, maxed out credit cards, lots of designer purchases, trips to Las Vegas. A lifestyle that looked glamorous on Instagram, but was being held together with debt and Fabio's endless hustle. On the digital side, they saw searches and messages that hinted at planning. Talk of Fabio's schedule, knowledge of when he'd be home, when he'd be alone. Discussions about money, insurance, the future. They also noticed something about the day of the murder itself. The back door, they realized, showed no sign of forced entry. Remember how early stories talked about a break-in? About burglars? That made sense if strangers had hopped a fence, jimmied a lock, and stumbled upon Fabio. But what if the killer didn't need to break anything? What if someone had simply left the door unlocked? In later testimony, a cooperating co-defendant would say exactly that Monica had promised to leave the side door open for Baker and his accomplice so they could slip in, attack Fabio, and make it look like a robbery. The theory forming in detectives' minds was this. This wasn't random. Fabio was directly targeted. And the people targeting him weren't strangers from some burglary crew. They were his wife and her secret lover. By June 2017, 5 months after the murder, LAPD and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office were ready to act. On a Friday morning, detectives moved in. In one location, they arrested Robert Baker. In another, they arrested 45-year-old Monica Sementilli. Both were taken into custody and booked on suspicion of murder. In a press conference later that day, prosecutors laid out their early theory publicly for the first time. They said they believed Fabio had been killed in a conspiracy between his wife and her lover. They alleged that Monica and Baker were engaged in an intimate relationship for about a year and a half before the murder. They said that financial gain, specifically the $1.6 million life insurance policy, was a key motive. Both were charged with capital murder with a special circumstance of murder for financial gain. That special circumstance is crucial under California law. It made them eligible for life without parole and even the death penalty. A third individual, they hinted, had also been involved that day at the house, restraining Fabio while Baker stabbed him. That accomplice was still outstanding, they said. Someone out there knew more about what had happened. Monica and Robert were held without bail. For Fabio's family, the arrests were a punch in the chest. Up until then, they'd been told the killers were probably burglars, faceless criminals, outsiders. It was easier, in a way, to picture random evil. Now they were being told that the woman they'd welcomed into their family more than 20 years earlier, the mother of Fabio's 2 youngest children, might have helped plan his murder. His sister Morella would later say that when she heard Monica had been arrested, she felt like she'd been stabbed all over again. Betrayal on top of grief. In court, both Monica and Baker stood before a judge and entered the same plea: not guilty. Their attorneys insisted there had been no murder plot, no agreement, no plan to cash in a life insurance policy. Baker, they suggested, had acted alone. If he had done anything at all, Monica, they said, was being unfairly targeted because she'd had an affair. The judge set their next hearings. The long pre-trial process began. Behind bars, Monica's world shrank to a series of cells, visiting rooms, and monitored phone calls. Baker sat in a different jail, facing not only the murder charge, but the reality that his DNA, phone records, and a trail of evidence all pointed straight at him. Outside, Fabio's friends and the entire hair industry tried to make sense of a story that had gone from tragic burglary to love affair murder plot. The smiling photos of Fabio and Monica as a couple now looked different. The racquetball selfies, the bandaged finger at the wake, the Instagram posts about grief. Everything took on a new, darker meaning. In the next part, we'll dig into what came next. The quiet arrest of a third man, the chilling details of how the attack was carried out, and the years of delays and maneuvering that finally led to dramatic courtroom showdowns, including a convicted killer taking the stand to say he acted alone, and a wife insisting she knew nothing about the plan that left her husband dead by the pool. For now, the picture is clear enough to move us forward. This was never about a random burglar hopping a fence. This was about lust, money, and a plan that began on a racquetball court and ended in a backyard soaked with blood. By the summer of 2017, Los Angeles police believed they knew who had killed Fabio Sementilli and why. They had the DNA under his fingernails. They had the phone records. They had the Porsche, abandoned with traces of the same unknown man's blood inside. They'd arrested that man, racquetball coach, and convicted sex offender Robert Baker. They'd arrested Fabio's wife, Monica, accusing her of planning the whole thing with her secret lover to cash in on a life insurance policy. But there was still a missing piece. In their public statements, detectives hinted that a third person had been involved. Someone who'd been at the house with Baker when Fabio was stabbed. Someone who'd helped restrain him. Someone who had vanished back into the crowd while all the attention focused on the widow and her racquetball coach. For years, that shadowy figure was just that, a shadow. The case crawled through the slow, grinding machinery of the criminal justice system. Monica and Baker sat in jail, shuffled through pre-trial hearings, motions, delays, COVID backlogs, and endless legal arguments. Their attorneys filed paperwork attacking the evidence, arguing over what could be shown to a future jury, what should be thrown out, what should be sealed. Outside, the beauty industry moved on. New trends, new products, new faces. But every January, around the anniversary of Fabio's death, there would be a flicker of memory. Social posts from his friends and protégés, a photo of Big Daddy on stage, messages about how much he was missed. His family in Canada waited. They watched as the burglary gone wrong story morphed into a love triangle murder plot, and then seemed to stall. Year after year passed with no trial date in sight. His sisters began to wonder if they would ever actually see justice, or if this case would just live forever in limbo. Then in 2023, everything shifted again. Robert Baker, the man whose DNA had put him at the scene and whose phone records had placed him near the house and the abandoned Porsche, surprised everyone. He folded. Instead of going to trial, he stood before a judge and pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He admitted that the special circumstances were true: murder for financial gain and murder while lying in wait. That plea took the death penalty off the table for him. In exchange for admitting his role, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For prosecutors, it was a huge win. The man who actually wielded the knife would never be free again. They also had the option, if they wanted, to call him as a witness someday. But Baker had a twist of his own. From the moment he took that deal, he started saying that Monica had nothing to do with the murder. He told reporters, documentarians, and later a 48 Hours crew that he alone was responsible, that he killed Fabio because he was obsessed with Monica, wanted her for himself, and believed that if her husband was gone, she could be with him all the time. On paper, he had already admitted to a murder for financial gain conspiracy with Monica. Austin testified that Baker paid him not in cash, but in gold coins. Another detail that sounded like something out of a movie but was backed by physical evidence. They left in the Porsche. At some point, they ditched Austin and later abandoned the car, which is where detectives eventually found it, sitting on a street with traces of Fabio's blood inside. On the stand, Austin was pressed hard by Monica's defense team. They attacked his credibility, pointed out that he'd gotten a plea deal, suggested he had every reason to blame Monica in order to save himself. They highlighted that he had never personally spoken to her about killing Fabio, that everything he knew about her wishes came from Baker. Austin didn't deny that. He repeated that his direct information came from his friend, that Baker told him Monica wanted her husband dead, that she would leave the door open, that it was about money and getting out of the marriage. Everything he did after he got a text message, Austin said, implying that Baker was getting instructions in real time from Monica. He told the jury he never saw those texts himself. He didn't hear the actual phone calls. But he watched the way Baker's phone would buzz, and then the plan would shift. Where to go, when to wait, when to move. While Austin was telling this story, Monica sat at the defense table, sometimes with her head bowed, sometimes wiping away tears. her lawyers painted a different picture. They said she was guilty of an affair, not murder. They argued that Baker was obsessed with her, that he killed Fabio on his own so he could be with her, and now he and Austin were trying to drag her down so they didn't have to take the full blame. They reminded the jury that Baker had repeatedly said publicly that Monica had nothing to do with the plot. But the prosecution had a simple counter-argument. If this was just a passion killing, why was the life insurance policy so central? Why the unlocked door? Why the prior visit and house tour? Why wait until Fabio was alone at home? Why the staged burglary? And more importantly, why had Monica spent a year and a half lying about the affair in the first place? Over 10 weeks, jurors watched Monica's double life come into focus. The wife posting loving photos of her family on social media. The lover secretly meeting Baker at hotels and gyms. The woman crying at her husband's funeral. The same woman, prosecutors said, who left the front door unlocked so her lover and his friend could walk in and butcher her husband by the pool. In the final part, we'll look at how those 10 weeks ended. The verdict that made Monica collapse in court, the life without parole sentence that followed, and the emotional impact statements from Fabio's sisters and children. Along with the bigger questions this case raises about greed, lust, and what betrayal really looks like when it's carried all the way to murder. The jury only needed 3 days. After 10 long weeks of testimony, thousands of pages of phone records, brutal autopsy photos, and hours of video, 12 strangers walked into a room and decided whether a wife was just an adulterer or a murderer. They went through the same questions you probably asked yourself listening to this story. Was this a love triangle that got out of control? Or was it a cold, calculated plan to get rid of a husband and collect his money? They weighed Robert Baker's shifting stories. They weighed Christopher Austin's plea deal and his detailed account of the attack. They considered Monica's own words, her lies about the affair, her behavior before and after Fabio's death. In the end, they believed what the prosecution had been saying since day one. Fabio didn't die in a burglary gone wrong. He died in a conspiracy. On April 11, 2025, the clerk read the verdict out loud in a Los Angeles courtroom. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. And the special circumstance allegations? True. The jury found that the murder had been committed for financial gain and by means of lying in wait. Those special findings mattered. They meant this wasn't just any murder. Under California law, they made Monica eligible for life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Reporters in the courtroom said she burst into tears as the words sank in. The woman who had once posed beside Fabio in family photos, smiling on vacations, celebrating birthdays, hosting dinner parties, now sat at the defense table sobbing, her life narrowing to a concrete cell and a prison number. Across the room, Fabio's sisters held on to each other. For them, this wasn't a victory. It was a confirmation of something they'd felt in their bones since the day Monica was arrested. That the person who had vowed to love and protect their brother had instead helped sign his death warrant. The verdict didn't bring Fabio back, but it did something else. It finally named what happened to him. Not tragedy, not burglary, murder. By the time sentencing rolled around in June 2025, 2 of the 3 people involved in that backyard attack already knew their fates. Robert Baker, the racquetball coach and secret lover whose DNA was under Fabio's fingernails, had taken his deal in 2023. No contest to first-degree murder and conspiracy. Special circumstances admitted. Life in prison without parole. Christopher Austin, the Oregon probation officer who helped restrain Fabio while Baker stabbed him, had taken his own deal in January 2025. No contest to second-degree murder. A sentence of 15 to 16 years to life, with a chance at parole someday, if a board ever believes he deserves it. That left Monica. At her sentencing hearing on June 23, 2025, the courtroom filled up again. Same wood paneling, same judge, same rows of benches. Different energy. The trial had been about facts. Sentencing was about impact. The defense asked the judge to show mercy. They argued that Monica should get 25 years to life, a sentence that, at least in theory, would leave a tiny window for parole when she was an elderly woman. They talked about her age, her lack of prior criminal record, the years she'd already spent in custody waiting for trial. Prosecutors pushed back hard. They reminded the court that Fabio had been ambushed at his own home on a Monday afternoon by people his wife had welcomed into their lives. They reminded everyone that his teenage daughter had been the one to find him face down in a pool of blood. They said Monica wasn't just involved. She was the mastermind. The one who knew Fabio's schedule. The one who allegedly promised to leave the door unlocked. The one who stood to gain $1.6 million in life insurance if he died. The judge listened. Then he invited the victim's family to speak. First came Fabio's sister, Morella. She walked to the podium and looked at the woman who had been her sister-in-law for nearly 20 years, the aunt to her children, the person she'd shared holidays and vacations and Sunday dinners with, and she unloaded. She talked about Fabio, Big Daddy, as a son, a brother, a father. She described his laugh, his generosity, the way he made everyone feel like they mattered. She talked about getting the phone call from Los Angeles and feeling like someone had ripped her insides out. Then, she turned to Monica. She called her actions calculated cruelty. She said Monica had smiled in their faces while carrying on an affair and plotting behind the scenes. She described the murder as a betrayal layered on top of betrayal, betraying their trust, betraying Fabio's love, and betraying her own daughters by destroying their father. Other family members spoke too. Fabio's older children, extended relatives. Everyone who stepped up to the microphone had their own version of the same story. This wasn't just about one man dying. It was about a giant hole in a family that nothing could fill. Fabio's son Luigi talked about how his father had been his best friend, his guide, his anchor. How he'd lost not just a parent, but the person he called on good days and bad ones. How his dad never got to meet future grandchildren, never got to see what their lives became. One of Fabio and Monica's daughters spoke about what it's like to be 16, walk into your backyard after school, and find your father dying on the patio. How the image of his body, the blood, the sirens, all of it, still woke her up at night. How she had to grieve her father while watching her mother sit in a glass-walled jail visiting room. Judge Ronald Cohen had heard a lot in his career, but this case, he later said, stood out. Fabio had been stabbed 7 times. 3 of those wounds passed straight through his body, 1 pierced his heart. The attack wasn't quick. It wasn't a single blow. It was prolonged, frenzied. The medical examiner testified that even after the first wounds, Fabio might have been conscious for a short time, aware that he was being killed in his own backyard. Cohen compared the roles in the crime. Baker, he said, had no planning ability at all. He saw him as the muscle. Dangerous, yes, but not the brains behind the operation. Monica, on the other hand, he called the mastermind. She had the motive, the money, the affair, the desire to avoid divorce. She had the opportunity, access to the house, total control of the home schedule. She had the role that made everything else possible. Without her, there was no unlocked door, no knowledge of when Fabio would be alone, no life insurance windfall. The judge rejected the defense request for 25 to life. He sentenced Monica Cementilli to life in prison without the possibility of parole. No second chances, no parole hearings, No hope of walking free. A lot of people following the case focused on the sensational parts. The ex-porn actor turned racquetball coach, the secret affair, the gold coins, the staged burglary. It has all the pieces of a made-for-TV movie, but at its core, this is a story about something much simpler and much uglier: greed and betrayal. Monica could have left. If she was unhappy, she had options. She could have filed for divorce, fought over property, taken her share, and gone off to build a life with whoever she wanted. It would have been messy and expensive and emotionally brutal, like most divorces. Instead, prosecutors said she helped pick a faster route, have someone else do the dirty work, and cash the check. Baker could have walked away. He could have finished the racquetball sessions, ended the affair, gone on with his life. Instead, he let his obsession and ego lead him into murder. He claims now that he did it because he wanted her, that he was acting out of twisted love, not money. But love doesn't require a life insurance policy, and it doesn't require stabbing someone 7 times while a friend holds them down. Austin could have refused. He was a probation officer. His job on paper was to guide people away from crime, not toward it. But when his old friend called with an offer, he said yes. He climbed into the trunk of that rental car. He walked up that tree-lined street. He covered Fabio's eyes while the knife went in. 3 different people. 3 different sets of choices. 1 man dead on the concrete. For Fabio's family, the case is over on paper. All 3 responsible parties had been convicted and sentenced. The woman who used to stand beside him in photos is now inmate Sementilli, locked away for life. The man whose DNA he tore from under his own fingernails in a desperate attempt to fight back will die behind bars. The 3rd man will one day sit in front of a parole board and try to explain why he deserves freedom when Fabio never got another day. But there's a part of this that never ends, no matter how many court dates are finished. Every time a hair show plays an old video of Fabio on stage, his sisters see the brother who called them from airport gates and hotel rooms just to chat. Every time his kids walk past a racquetball court, a Porsche, a bottle of professional hair color, there's a flash of memory they didn't ask for. Every time his former students teach a class, they hear his voice in their head cheering them on. He still lives in the work he did, in the techniques he taught, the careers he helped launch, the confidence he gave to other artists. People who never met him still learn from those he mentored. But the personal parts, birthdays, anniversaries, quiet phone calls, those are gone. There's another layer that makes this case stick. For months, the narrative was burglary gone wrong. The idea that danger came from outside, from strangers, from faceless criminals hopping fences in expensive neighborhoods. That story was wrong. The call, as the cliché goes, was coming from inside the house, not literally over the phone, but close enough. The killer didn't need to smash a lock. He walked in through a door someone he trusted had left unlocked. And that might be the most unsettling thing about this entire case. Fabio was doing what a lot of people dream of. He built a career he loved. He turned that career into a global role. He moved his family to a sunny house with a pool. He tried to be a good husband and father, working his way back from cancer and still showing up for everyone around him. He didn't let strangers into his home. He didn't invite in danger. He never imagined the real threat was sleeping in the same bed and hitting balls at the racquetball club. So after everything we've walked through, here's where it lands. Betrayal doesn't always look like dramatic screaming matches or public blow-ups. Sometimes it looks like a smiling photo on Instagram, a pizza night with friends, a door left just a little bit open on an ordinary Monday afternoon. What do you think? Was justice done with life without parole for Monica and Baker, and a chance at parole someday for Austin? Do you believe Baker's version, that he alone decided to kill for love, or Austin's version, that this was a three-person plan driven by money and opportunity? And what would you have seen in this situation? Looking from the outside in? Would anything have tipped you off before it was too late? Let me know in the comments. If you want more deep dive, multi-part true crime stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next case. Take care of yourselves. Look twice at the stories people tell you about their lives. And remember, the most dangerous lies are often the ones told with a smile.